Hello, I'm going to make a video on chapter 23. This is a shorter chapter, so hopefully it won't take that long. We are finishing up with the High Renaissance. We're going to go up north and we're going to look at what's happening with those countries. So we're going to go up to Germany and look at the Eisenheim altarpiece. This is by Matthias Grünwald. And this is a polyptych, which is a many-piece altarpiece. We've seen triptychs with just the two panels, and we'll see another one very soon. So this has several ways of opening it. Um, and this is the outside, so these doors here would open up in the middle here. It was made for the Hospital of St. Anthony. St. Anthony is the saint over here. He is the saint of suffering and disease, and he was known to have a terrible skin disease, which burned. And so there's this saying called St. Anthony's fire. So people at this hospital would have that kind of suffering. And so the panels are supposed to show the idea of suffering and salvation. So we have on the left Saint Sebastian. On the right, we have Saint Anthony himself. He had to, wear all these clothes and stuff so nobody could see his ailment. And then below, we have the Lamentation, and of course, the middle we have the crucifix here. And of course, the Germans have a very sort of graphic way of showing figures and pain. We haven't seen a lot of crucifixes that looked like Christ was suffering. So here we really do see the suffering, which goes with St. Anthony. And we have the two Johns, um, one John holding Mary, and then John pointing out the crucifix. So when you opened this panel here, and you would separate the arm from Christ's body, and that's why Grunwald made it a little off center so that you could one arm would look like it was detached when you opened the altarpiece. You can see the split right there. And this is a much better slide. And you can see he actually has like the ailment of St. Anthony on him, this rash. You can see every rib and the suffering. So it's much more real than, say, Michelangelo's Pieta, where she holds, this classical Greek body of a young male who doesn't seem like he had suffered at all. And we, in general, don't see Christ in such a state. Grunwald has sort of taken a step towards being creative with such a scene. So this is all the information on St. Anthony. I could not find a slide of him with this pig that he's usually with. He lives as a hermit because he's infectious. And the Antonine monks devoted themselves to care for the sick and dying peasants. So we've seen that before in other chapters. And that's the skin infection I was just talking about. Another German artist we look at, probably a more important German artist, is Albrecht Dürer. This is his self-portrait. He was a young artist who got wind of the Italian Renaissance. He must have seen a painting or a print or something, and he decided to make it his business to travel all around Europe and to go to Italy and study. And we do know he studied Da Vinci's art and saw many other of the works we looked at. And he thought this sort of graphic German way of doing things, like Grunwald was doing, should be a little bit more classical, refined, like the Renaissance. So he goes and studies, and he single-handedly brings the Renaissance up to Germany. He made very many self-portraits. We see him as a young boy, an older man who doesn't get too old in these, but he used himself as a model, which we're going to see another artist in the next chapter too. He had a moniker or a logo, if you want to call it that. The name Dürer means door, And so he sort of made these gates or like a doorway for his D. So Albrecht Dürer. He's kind of hard to put on an exam because he always has his initials somewhere. You could see him. So here's his self-portrait, 1500. So we're right at the time when all of the big names are working in Italy. So he would have gone and seen all of them. And here he is in a self-portrait looking like Christ. That's not a coincidence. He has the sign of the blessing that Christ usually has in his hands, and he has the beard and long hair of Christ. He very much admired Da Vinci's way of studying, his very scientific method for studying things. And he took it upon himself to start studying things in his sketchbook. So this is a great piece of turf, it's called. So it's the point of view from the ground, so not looking down at this stuff. So he's getting down there and making these sketches. This is in watercolor. We're going to see artists go outside and paint in watercolor in the future. And this whole idea of sort of like an uncomposed, even though he probably did compose it, uncomposed work of art is kind of a modern approach, sort of like letting the subject dictate what the composition should be. And this is very sort of, it looks chaotic, but he has to paint every blade of grass, so it can't just be random. What he's really well known for in art history is his engraving techniques. Um, he doesn't invent engraving, but he perfects it. Uh, if you're going to get your name out there in the Renaissance and be a famous artist, one way to do it is to make smaller, portable, sellable works of art and distribute them all over um, Europe. So that is indeed what Albert Dürer did. This is his Fall of Man. And of course, it's Adam and Eve, and you can see he's been to Italy and he studied the Greek classical figures via the Renaissance, of course. But in Rome, if you go there, you would be able to, study actual Roman and Greek copies, Roman copies of Greek sculptures as well. So he's been there, he's studied, um, and you see both of these figures in their classic contrapposto. And we have the scene, of course, where, you know, Eve is going to be tempted, and then, of course, she's going to tempt Adam, and together they will commit the original sin. And all of these have to do with the humors. This was a scientific thing that was sort of very popular in Europe at the time. You had one of these personalities. You could be uh, melancholy, phlegmatic, sanguine, or choleric, and then these animals would represent that. And speaking of melancholy, we have Melancholia 1 here. Melancholy is often depicted as a female, and of course, you probably know what melancholy is. It's sort of like sadness or depression. And we have this typical pose we'll see again in modern art. Um, and we have this figure with her little cherub here. We have a greyhound dog, and then we have all these strange, we have all this mathematics here, scales, this giant geometric shape here, another sphere here. So some of this has to do with math. We have these geometric shape, these mathematics, these are equations. This is actually the year it was made, going across the bottom here. Melancholia was the muse of the arts, but she was also the muse of math. So this could kind of go either way. But in any event, this is an engraving, and this was reproduced many times. So this idea of printmaking is becoming very popular in Europe, and we're going to see this sort of change a lot of things. If you can't get your paintings out there, you can get these little drawings out there and get your name out there, make some money, and become a little bit more famous. And here's another one that's not in your book, but I like this one. Dürer also did this painting, which is associated with the Protestant Reformation and Luther. We have on the left Saint John and Peter reading the Bible. And then we have Peter is actually standing behind John, because Peter is thought to have been the first pope. And so John the evangelist preaches the word of God, and Protestants believe in following the word of God, the Bible, rather than all of these images the Catholics are using. And they also don't follow the Pope. So this is a direct reference to what's going on in the church. Another German is Lucas Cranach the Elder. I'm not going to show you the younger, so you can just call him Cranach. And this is the Judgment of Paris, where Paris is asked to judge the three goddesses and say who is the most beautiful. And Venus gives him um, Helen of Troy as the gift. So I'm showing this painting. This is in your book, and you can see that's the Renaissance is coming up north, right? It's mythology, it's nudes. We see this almost sfumado, hazy landscape, the style of Leonardo da Vinci. You can kind of see it in all the trees as well. So Cronach's being influenced by the Italians via other things happening in Germany. And Cranach is actually very good friends with Luther. We'll talk about him in a second. They were each other's children's godfathers. Um, and Cranach is often called the artist of the Reformation. So here we have Martin Luther. Martin Luther is nailed his 95 complaints or theses to the Wittenberg Church in 1517 overnight on October 31st, Halloween. And in the morning, these were found, and thus began the Protestant Reformation, asking for reforms from the church. Um, ha- uh, the day after Halloween is often called, of course, All Saints' Day, but it's sometimes called Reformation Day. If you ever see that on a calendar, it's in reference to this. So they're such good friends that Cranach actually made portraits of Luther, the reformer, and there's all that information. So what do the Protestants want reformed? They want the church to stop giving indulgences, which is a way to buy your way out of sin. They want to get rid of the corruption. They don't want to follow the Pope. They think he's too powerful, and they think all this money being spent on art is wasteful, and that people are becoming confused as to what the art is supposed to be doing. And this hopefully makes a little sense if you think about the Sistine ceiling. I mean, many people go see that now, and they're not Catholic. They're going to the most holy church, to Catholicism now, which is, the Pope's church, and they're looking at the art as something other than educational or, spiritual. They're looking at it because Michelangelo made it. And I think at this point, the Protestants are thinking this is more like iconoclasm, which is, or an icon, which means you pray to an image, hoping to get something from it. And iconoclasm is the destruction of such images. And this is really what the Protestants are calling for, not necessarily Luther, but another Protestant, Calvin, who was a little bit more. Um, of a fanatic about this kind of thing. Obviously, Chronic's okay with some images, not in churches, but he's best buds with Chronic. The Council of Trent forms to push back against the Reformation, and what the Catholics decide to do is to make some reforms, but to come up with this explosion of art. So, what they do with this complaint about the art is they make more art. It's art that's meant to be exciting and infuse energy back into the church and bring people back. Um, and They believe that iconoclasm is not acceptable. You should not destroy these things because these images are a way to show spirituality. So they kind of justify all of this art being made. and bought. And this isn't in your book, but this is in North Carolina. If anybody wants to go see it, it is in the Raleigh Museum, a chronic with a portrait of Luther. Hans Holbein, another one with the younger or the elder, uh, was the court painter to Henry VIII. You probably know that song, Henry VIII, who was said to have been a very big man, and you can see how big he is here. A very proud man, a very elaborate, he lived a very elaborate life, and you can see him here in all of his glory. So Holbein is Swiss, but he works for the English king and lives in England. This is his famous portrait of the French ambassadors. One is an ambassador, one is a cardinal who's also an ambassador for the church, the French church. You can see his collar and his hat. And these two are leaning on a table, the top of which has all kinds of things for stargazing and astrology, so it's celestial. And then the bottom has earthly things like book reading, music. This is actually a music book. I'll show you close up, and a lute, and a globe. So they're making this difference between this argument between what's important. It's almost like Plato and Aristotle in the School of Athens. Um, and you can see that this man here is extremely wealthy. He has a giant palace back in France, and you can see all of his, you know, sort of flamboyant expenses. Um, and the odd thing in this painting is this big anamorphic shape. An anamorphic shape is something that doesn't seem to have any fine edges or to make sense as far as volume. Um, and most people look at this and think it's like some kind of bone or a limb or a piece of wood or something. It just seems so odd that it's leaning here in this diagonal. And here's this book of music. And Holbein's just incredibly good at all these little details, like all the textures, the carpet. And so this anamorphic shape here, this is a little less stretched, but you can see if you go to one side of the painting where you can't really even see the painting anymore, this thing comes into focus. And it turns, of course, into a skull. And a skull would be a reminder of death. So we have this whole idea of, you know, the heavens, the earth, and the reminder of how to get from one to the other here. So even though it seems like it's a political portrait, it has all these hidden meanings in it. Hieronymus Bosch, we're just going to quickly cover this because this is a very, very odd work of art, but we will bring it back when we start talking about surrealism in the future. Um, I want you to look at the dates here, 1450 to 1516. This is really early for what this visionary artist um, is doing. So he's in the Netherlands and Burgundy. And remember, the Netherlands is a place with all the symbols, right? So every little thing means something else. This is a triptych. Remember, that's a center and then two panels that fold. This is when it is folded. This is what you see. And already this looks pretty modern. It's like a see-through sphere with this scene in here, sort of seascape. And then up in the corner here is a floating figure reading. It's God with the Bible. Let's take a closer look at this thing. So already this looks so strangely modern, right? Like this painted reflection here, like it's a glass globe. And this is thought to be either the Great Flood, like the one that um, God sends after Moses, and then it's also thought it might be like the third day of the world being created. So on the third day, he creates water. It's not known exactly which it is. And this is if you open the triptych, You see the center panel, which is what is it is called after or named after the Garden of Earthly Delights. And then we have two other scenes on the left and the right. So let's look at the left has the creation scene of Adam and Eve in the garden. And it looks like God is about to introduce Adam to Eve. And we haven't really seen this much in art history, right? We usually see the end result of Adam and Eve way after they've met and she's ruined everything. Um, so he's about to introduce her, and you can see Adam is kind of like sitting up. He's just sort of coming to life in a way. And I put in cat with mouse question mark here because it said that there is no death in the Garden of Eden, so that if a cat kills a mouse, that must be a symbol. That's a symbol for things to come after these two uh, commit original sin. There is going to be a death, and it's going to be the death of Christ, who's going to have to come back and save everybody. But you can see all these strange creatures, some of them real, some of them totally sort of made up, all just getting along in the Garden of Eden. And even the tree is just so stylized and abstract. And the center is sort of like the middle scene. So we have like when they've just first met, and of course they're going to um, commit the sin, and then this is the earthly scene. So we have sort of heavenly, earthly, and then soon get to hell. So this has a lot of things to do with more contemporary things like that Dürer thing with alchemy, which is what some of these references are. But really, we're just going to look at this for this strange depiction of fantastic creatures and things that are sort of in Bosch's mind. He sort of stands out as totally original at this time. And I mean, this is what surrealism is. What these combination things that don't really exist. Um, what is going on? What are these people doing? They all seem to be having some kind of strange party with these organic things, and the scale makes it seem like it's, these are like almost like giant strawberries, some of them. Like this one is a giant strawberry. So the scale is off. Like the fish, the birds, they're all really big, and these people are really small. Like what is the scene? So all of this revelry and partying, of course, things aren't going to go right. We've already seen Adam and Eve, and we know what happens to them. So same thing here. All of this sinning, eventually you're going to be sent to hell. So this is the right panel. And you can see, of course, Bosch is like, turn the lights off. You're going, everything's going to go dark. You're going to go to hell. And we have, instead of people partying, carrying on with each other, we see them, dying or suffering. We see this bird-headed thing eating this woman sitting on his throne, sort of all of these figures like they're going to hell. Um, and it's the same setup as any other Last Judgment we've seen, where, on the left are the people are heavenly, and on the right, our right, Christ's left, are, the, the hell scenes. So it's the same setup, and that is what's going on. And this part here is usually the most reproduced. This is on some album cover. I can't remember which one. And the face here of this egg person with this strange hat is Bosch himself. Kind of looks like the Mona Lisa too. Maybe this has symbolism as well, but we're going to calm down a lot from Bosch. This is the money changer and his wife. Um, we have this is up in Antwerp. The merchant class has become very wealthy. There's a linen industry, a wool industry. There's all kinds of trade going on, and there is a lot of money being exchanged up in the north. So we have the merchant class having enough money to enjoy the worldly goods that are usually reserved for the very wealthy. And they are in Protestant countries. So we're going to see, what is it they are going to show in their art. So this is an everyday scene, a genre scene of a man and a wife, and that's his job. He is counting money at like a shop, and she is staring at the money. She has a Bible open, but she's not paying attention to the Bible as a good wife should. She is staring at the worldly goods. Um, so this is the story about, how you live your life, no excess, how to behave yourself as a good Protestant. Here we have the close up of the money and pearls here, some other worldly goods. And then we have this little mirror here that looks out to a window. And in the window, we see, um, a figure who is reading a Bible. So, this reminder of this is how you are supposed to behave, not like that wife. We haven't seen a lot of females. We're going to see another one in the next chapter. Katerina van Hemesen. She was trained by her father. So there's the loophole to become an artist. You have to be trained. You usually go study with an artist, and then you go and be their intern for 7 years. But of course, women aren't able to do that. They can't go anywhere without a chaperone. So at least she has her father to train her. And e even though you're a trained artist, you're still not able to just go around and paint whatever you want or be around men. So mostly when we see women artists, we see women painting women. And in the future, we'll see women painting women and children. But in the near future, we'll see women doing much naughtier things in the next chapter. And this may just be the very first self-portrait of an artist at an easel. I'm going to see another one actually in the next chapter of another woman. So she painted lots of people. She was very successful in her time for what she did. Bruegel the Elder, another elder, um, is a Flemish painter. He's a genre painter, so that's a term you should know. Genre painting are scenes of everyday life. In the north, though, in Flanders, they will usually have some morality or proverb. There'll be some kind of hidden meaning that usually has to do with, leading a good life, a Protestant life. Most of Flanders is Protestant, or was. There's no Flanders now. So the scenes of everyday life, like this. I don't know if they do this every day. So this is called the peasant dance. We're not going to really look at this one because there's another one. But so here we have all these figures, um, you know, at their dance. But you can see they're acting like they're in excess. They're drinking too much. They're dancing. They're carrying on in public. These two are kissing over here. There's, this woman's trying to pull this guy into the doorway over here. And so everyone's carrying on in a very sort of almost sinful way, about to lead to sin and excess. And then there in the background, if you follow this diagonal down the road, is the reminder of how you should be living your life, the church in the background. And this is the one in your book. This is the Netherlandish Proverbs. So these are, some of them are very lighthearted. And so you're supposed to enjoy like walking through and finding everything, the puns and the proverbs. A proverb is like a saying we have, like, don't look a gift horse in the mouth, something like that. So you're supposed to, wander through and figure out all these little proverbs. So it's supposed to be joyful, but all the proverbs are supposed to be a moral lesson, like advice on how to leave a good life, or sayings that we have about that. So, some of these don't really translate to us, like a roof tiled with tarts. That means like you're so dumb with your money. You live in such excess that you would, use tarts, which would be expensive in the north, to line your roof. Like I said, not all of them are for us. And then some of these, you can look this up. There's like, you know, I don't even know how many are in this thing, 100 or something. Um, just some that might relate to us I picked out. So 27 is she carries fire in one hand and water in the other. To us, that means you're two-faced, right? So there she is, number 27. She's two-faced with her two things. Um, what can smoke do to iron? So it's useless to try to change the existing orders. I think we kind of have like you can't beat City Hall, maybe is what we would say. What's that? 31. It's too dark to see. He runs his head against a stone wall, hitting your head with a brick wall. This guy right here. That's something we definitely say. To get up in arms about something, we have that saying. So be to be driven into armor. So 36. There she goes. Oh, same guy. So these are, if you go online, you can see what every one of these means. So people would go back, go through this and like, get joy out of it, but they would also understand that each one is like a little proverb. He also did this painting, The Fall of Icarus, right? Icarus flies too close to the sun, takes a fall. So it's like what the Greeks would call hubris or excessive pride. So that would be something that a Protestant will warn you against. And here we have just a guy with a cart going down the street, and we have like an aerial view of the water, and this shepherd with his sheep, but he's not looking at the sheep. He's looking up at the sky, not paying attention to what he's supposed to be doing. So this guy is doing the wrong thing. This guy is like a hardworking guy. And then you see, the whole landscape here. We have the atmospheric perspective. And it's probably not until later you see that this is where Icarus is, right? The painting is called The Fall of Icarus, but where's Icarus in the whole thing? He is subverted, he is hidden until you find it later on. Because you yourself, or me, as I'm talking about, I'm going through the painting, not focusing on the important thing, which is what this guy's doing. So the whole thing is sort of a visual pun, a visual proverb in a way. Don't lead an excess life, or that's what's going to happen to you. What happened to Icarus? Don't be that guy, or you'll be that guy. And then this is Hunters in the Snow. This is like a genre painting of just an everyday scene, right? These guys going out, but this is also, a landscape. And what Bruegel has done is something kind of modern. He's broken this landscape into all these sort of flat plains so that we start with the big scale. This is light on dark, so it's bigger and, in the foreground. So we sort of start with this, and then we sort of wander through the whole winding thing into the distance, sort of like these birds would do. It's just a beautiful landscape. This is the last guy in our chapter, and he is usually either put in with the Mannerists or he's in with the Baroque artists. I would say he is both. He's a Spanish artist, so he's not up north, but he is Mannerist. So this is, I think, your book is just dividing it like this is all the Italians were doing, Mannerist and Renaissance. Now we're elsewhere, and then for the Baroque, we'll go back to Italy. So they're just sort of covering all of Europe around Italy. Uh, you can see he has a very long name, and he's usually called El Greco, which means the Greek. Um, he is Greece, so he's from Crete, which if you took 114, you know about that. He will become the court painter in Spain, and he is participating in the art of the Counter Reformation. So here we have his uh, picture that's in Boston. He uses a lot of black and whites. This is why the lighting, um, and he has a lot of things in common with the Baroque, as you'll see in the next chapter. So this is why he's sometimes thought of as that. But he does have a very elongated style, and this is why he's in the Mannerist chapter. This is his view of Toledo, not Toledo, Ohio, Toledo, Spain. Um, I'm trying to think. It's much higher than Toledo is. Um, uh, so we have this strange landscape where, it's an aerial view looking up a hill, and then we have this storm kind of coming in the landscape. So we have all this drama and diagonal, and this strange lighting. And when we get to the Baroque chapter, we're going to remember this. It's also distorted, so it can be Mannerist in that time. And we haven't seen a lot of just straight on landscapes. As a matter of fact, we'll see them in the Northern Baroque. And this is his sort of quintessential Counter Reformation painting. Remember, the church is trying to infuse energy into the church, bring people back to the church, and we're going to see that in the next chapter. So, what El Greco has done is he divided it into the real, the worldly, and then the spiritual. So, half and half here. Um, and very few figures are paying attention to what's going on up here, which is Mary and St. John sort of pleading the case for the count down here who's just passed away. Um, they're interceding for him, and very few figures are noticing this except for this guy here, who is probably a portrait of El Greco himself. So he is the enlightened one who can see, into the heavens. Um, so it's in direct response to this idea of iconoclasm, proving that art can be very spiritual. So all this movement, he's trying to show, like, things flying around as if they are spirits. But he's thought of as a mannerist as well, because you can see the figure here of St. John and this guy and this boy. Everything is extremely elongated, sort of like Pontormo. Um, or like Madonna of the Long Neck. So he does have things in common with them. But let's remember this guy when we get to Picasso, because Picasso often cites El Greco as his inspiration for his blue period. And you can see some of these things are all blue and grays. And that is something that Picasso, another Spanish painter, will steal from him. All right, until the next chapter. Thanks.